Welcome to the Seniors for Climate National Check-in in preparation for the Seniors Day of Climate Action on October 1st. We have more than 1,000 people registered for this evening's webinar. My name is Amber Bennet, and in my day job, I'm the Executive Director of an organization called Reclimate. We focus on climate change communications and engagement, and we're based at Carleton University. I will be your moderator for the evening, so I'll help keep us on track for time and will help do some direction along the way. So in terms of the ground that we're going to cover, we have a number of presenters who are both a part of the organizing team, as well as some special guests. We'll be talking a bit more about the event itself and the pledge and the work that's going on behind the scenes and to help organize for October 1st. We do have a panel discussion in which I'll be moderating with David Suzuki and Courtney Howard. That will be followed by a period of time for questions and answers. And then we have a few examples, big and small, of events and activities that are planned to help inspire our creative juices. And then we'll have a presentation focused on what does it mean to move away from fossil fuels and what are some of the solutions that are available to us. I'm going to hand it over to Yvonne to offer the land acknowledgement. So thank you, Yvonne, who's joining us from Toronto and is a member of the Seniors for Climate Action now.
What does the earth ask of us? It's an honor to speak to our relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, whom we live among, near, and beside, and whose commitment to stewardship of these lands and territories has spanned millennia. The commitment to stewardship has never been under greater threat than today, when the causes of the climate emergency disrupt the capacity of natural systems to heal the air, land, and water. Like some fellow members of SCAN, or Seniors for Climate Action Now, I am connecting from the Greater Toronto Area, which lies in the watersheds of the Rouge, Don, Humber, Etobicoke, and Credit Rivers, all of which gather strength as they course southwards into Lake Ontario. Many of us unwittingly dwell somewhere atop or on the slope of the old shoreline of Lake Iroquois, where first peoples moved east and west to hunt, forage, and come together as a community as early as 10,000 years ago as the glaciers receded. Today, as descendants of settlers or of more recent newcomers, we are still governed by and benefiting from colonial institutions. Thus, we must acknowledge failure to properly honor the lands and treaties of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe, including the Mississauga of the Credit, as well as other Indigenous urban dwellers. Indigenous peoples are on the front lines of the climate emergency, wherever you call home. The peoples of the Arctic and subarctic, the coastal Appalachians, St. Lawrence and Hudson's Bay lowlands, the Precambrian Shield, the Great Plains, the Rockies and coastal ranges, Indigenous communities in all these regions face critical threats to the integrity of the lands and waters that we all depend on. From climate-related flooding, drought, and wildfire of vast areas, to sites slated for the storage of nuclear waste, to urban infrastructure projects upending neighborhoods of Indigenous youth and other marginalized groups, to indiscriminate mining claims on sensitive breathing lands dubbed the Ring of Fire, to biodiversity killing forestry practices that degrade the boreal, the sell-off of Crown land in the prairies despite adoption of the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to the multi-generational legacy of extractive industries in grassy narrows and the tar sands, Wet'suwet'ens and other Western First Nations facing of multiple threats to their integrity and sovereignty, fossil fuel transport expansion in the interior lands, as well as on the territorial waters of the West Coast. The word humility is derived from being of the humus or the earth. As an urban dweller, I consider humus, as in the natural world, as existing somewhere else outside that you have to travel to and return from. How to conceive of a forest, a river, or a flock of birds as persons in their own right, as kin rather than property, resources, or environmental services. According to Anishinaabe writer Jesse Wentu, it takes a summoning of deep memory of a time before the Anthropocene in order to conceive of the future we need. Potawatomi biologist Robin Wall-Kimmerer emphasizes a future grounded in reciprocity and respect for all of our non-human kin. What does the earth ask of us? Let's consider the advice of our Indigenous brothers and sisters and learn to listen. Thank you.
Thank you for the land acknowledgement. The next presenter that will be joining us is Rolly Montpellier. He is a lead for Seniors for Climate and one of the main characters helping to organize and help get this day going. So over to you, Rolly, and take it away.
Thank you, Amber. I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes talking about the core messaging that we have, how we're using it, and also very briefly talk about the pledge. So our core message is that we're seniors acting for a better world, free from the destruction caused by burning fossil fuels. So we have 3 pillars. The first pillar is we define what the problem is. The problem is clearly fossil fuel emissions. And we're trying to connect, we want to make sure we connect the dots so that all seniors or all Canadians understand the link between burning fossil fuels and, of course, the extreme weather and all of the climate breakdown that we're experiencing. And we're focusing also on the term unnatural disasters, because what used to be natural disasters, you know, those things that would occur every few years, every now and then. Well, because of their intensity and their frequency, they actually become unnatural because it's not part of the natural cycle. The next pillar is about solutions. And one of the solutions, there are many affordable solutions. And of course, we know about conserving energy and, you know, a transition to renewables and so on. But we must really start by starting to phase out the use of fossil fuels. And one of the things we are talking about, of course, is putting a cap on emissions. And I always like to put my cap on emissions when I talk about this. We're going to have 1,000 of these circulating across the land by October 1st. And then the next, of course, is the bold action. By bold action, what we mean is we want to maximize our impact. We are over 10 million seniors in Canada. We represent 25% of the population and also about 1 in every 3 voters. So our message to seniors for 2025, because there will be several elections, I think, in 2025, our message to senior is going to be vote for climate. We're going to be political. We're not going to be partisan, but we're asking seniors to vote for climate. Now, for each of these pillars, I mean, there are a series of talking points, and we're working with our media consultant on that. And the talking points, of course, for example, one talking point is, you know, we can't solve the climate crisis by burning more fossil fuels. And that's what we're doing right now. We're building more infrastructure that produces the kind of problem that causes more emissions. So there's a lot of messaging around these 3 pillars. And again, we're working with the media consultant on that. And that messaging, the questions and answers were provided to all of the folks across the land who did some video shoots lately. We did video shoots on 3 on-ground locations and about 6 Zoom calls. So this is the basis of the core messaging that you will hear more and more about. And also now I'm going to talk very quickly about the pledge, which is the Seniors for Climate Pledge. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just emphasize that there's some key words in there about sharing a vision of possibility, the common good, celebrating the beauty of the natural world. We understand that climate breakdown affects us all, and we pledge to use our voice. And a pledge is a personal thing. I pledge to use my voice and my vote to protect future generations. So we're going to be sharing the links to those documents. And one of the links we're going to be sharing in the chat is actually one that when you click on it, it takes you to a form where you can sign the pledge. And you can do this in about 15 seconds. So when you see that link, please take a few minutes or take a few seconds to do that while you're on the meeting this evening. That's all the time I'm going to take on this. I can answer some questions later on in the webinar.
Okay, so for the next 30 minutes, we have a panel discussion, and I can hardly believe that I get to be joined by our two guests. So I'm delighted to be joined by David Suzuki and Courtney Howard. I suspect that neither one of them need a lot of introductions, but just in case, David Suzuki is a father and a grandfather, and he's an award-winning geneticist and broadcaster. He co-founded the David Suzuki Foundation, and in 1975, he helped launch and host the long-running CBC Radio's Quirks and Quarks. And in 1979, he became familiar to audiences around the world as the host of CBC TV's Nature of Things, which still airs today. He has 29 honorary degrees, and he's written and co-written over 50 books, 20 of them for children. Dr. Courtney Howard is a dancer, a mother, an emergency physician in Yellowknife, and a clinical associate professor in the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. She's a nationally and globally recognized expert on the impacts of climate change on health and in the broader field of planetary health. She's also vice chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance. So thank you both for joining us. Just to help set up our conversation, I was thinking a little bit about some of the points that the presenters in our last webinar raised, including just some of the surprising insights, I think, for myself anyhow, around who are seniors and what is the opportunity. I loved that moment where they shared the suggested actions that people take on Seniors Day, which was giving a card or helping a senior across the road. And instead, the challenge that was put forward was to entirely flip that switch or that narrative. And so what we found out is that, seniors are actually more supportive than other segments of the population on climate action. They're more motivated by a moral responsibility to protect future generations. And they want to write the legacy that they're leaving behind in terms of the planet. They're more politically engaged. They have more resources, both in terms of time and finances, to make a change. And so they're really important. And so the challenge I think that was put forward was to tell a story about this kind of tremendous cohort of people with knowledge and skills and years of experience, who have the time and the energy and the financial resources and the determination to tackle the climate crisis. So I think that this is a moment, both of you think and talk a lot about this, and just to kind of hear from your perspective, why do you think October 1st is, and this particular event is so important, and how could we use this moment to reinforce some of the urgency and the need to move away from fossil fuel and burning fossil fuels? So Courtney, would you like to start us off?
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm coming to you from Chief Prague's territory, which is the traditional territory of the Yellowknives Dene, the North Slave Métis, and the Welliday Dene. And I love the way you've set this up. Some of you know I spent about 6 months trying to be a politician. And so I can speak from some degree of experience and say that politicians really care what seniors think. We know that you have money to donate, and we know that donations are actually a really big determinant of who ends up winning. When I was running, that was the only thing the media tracked, was how much everybody had fundraised, because there's such a strong correlation between fundraising and who ends up winning. So donations matter, votes matter, who shows up matter. Essentially, politicians respond to the people who show up. And every person who works on planetary health that I know of, both nationally and internationally, believes that politics is the limiting factor in our response. There's all sorts of things we can each do as individuals, but really we require political solutions. So I'm overjoyed to hear that that's really your focus, and I want you to know you have tremendous power. So knowing we're coming out of a difficult summer, I just wanted to present maybe a slightly new framing that you can use to help inform some of your work and some of the energy behind this. So as I've gone about this, I've realized that although I went to school to learn how to resuscitate the complex self-regulating system that we walk around in every day, and I thought we did that in the hospital, what I now understand is that our human health is completely underpinned by the health of the complex self-regulating system that we walk around on every day. And so as you move forward working on climate change, I'd encourage you to incorporate also some other elements of the planetary boundaries framework that also incorporates work around fresh water, biodiversity, ozone, as well as nitrogen and phosphorus, because I think it can help people understand that really what we're talking about is the actual stability of the Earth system itself as an organism. And so when I think about this, knowing that 6 out of our 9 planetary boundaries are actually now out of the safe range, as an emergency physician, if I think about the planet I'm walking around on every day, we would be standing in the emerge, and the sound we would be hearing would be beep, 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 which means go right now and do something to resuscitate that organism. And so sometimes I've spent a lot of time trying to get the mainstream medical world on board with this. I used to very frequently get the answer, we're not environmentalists. This diagram is what finally helped me get the Canadian Medical Association on board. So this is now on their strategic plan. I was on the board, and every meeting for about 2 years, I described the planetary health nest with my hands, saying our necessary structural underpinning are our ecological foundations. If that is stable, we get to build the social and economic systems that give rise to what we know are the social and structural determinants of health, things like income, housing, etc. When that's stable, we get to build, staff, and supply the incredibly complex structures that are our healthcare systems. And so once I started describing it like that, the surgeons will mostly want to be able to show up in the operating room at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning and have everything work and have the supplies they need, all of a sudden understood that what I was talking about wasn't something that was lateral to what they do, but instead was something that was absolutely necessary for what they do. And it was at that moment that there was essentially an aha moment, and all of a sudden this got onto the strategic plan. So if you're facing that in any of your communities, I would consider starting to maybe use some of this framing. I know after a summer of heat and fire that things can seem overwhelming. So as you move forward, I really encourage you to zoom out, take a look at the overall structure, figure out a thing you can do, whether it's something in your mind, in your family life, in your personal practices, in your community, or more broadly, zoom in on that target, use strategic tactics, and heart-moving stories such as Reclimate is so good at helping us figure out to win that thing, whatever it is. Maybe you're making beans for breakfast instead of eggs because they also have a lot of fiber and a lot of protein. It takes some organization to do that. That's a win. What the behavioral change evidence shows is that it's those changes, those very concrete moves that actually lend hope, that give us the energy we need to go on. And so whatever it is at whatever level, micro, meso, macro, what I love about this work is figuring out what those winnable things are, doing them, because what happens is you attract resources, you attract political resources, social resources. We all like to get on a bandwagon, and that's what can happen if you do this work. So some of the priority things that actually make life better right now and improve the climate tend to be easier to sell to decision makers. So basically, anytime we decrease fossil fuel related air pollution, which is estimated to cause up to 1 out of every 5 global premature deaths, we save lives immediately. We keep kids out of the emergency department with asthma. We let their parents then go to work because they're not sitting in the emergency department with their kid. We decrease deaths from the top 5 chronic diseases that kill Canadians. So when we move to clean electricity, we save lives. When we move away from fossil fuel transport, we save lives. When we plant trees, we decrease air pollution, save lives, and give people a natural environment that they can go to enjoy the health benefits of nature that we know reduce stress and give people a place to generate a sense of community. So when we move towards plant-rich diets, we know that we save land, we save water footprint, we also can give people a chance to experience the therapeutic effects of gardening and increase local food security. So all of these things are referred to as elements with co-benefits for health. And they've been shown in studies to actually be things that are really appealing to decision makers. So they're areas where it's easier to move the dial and kind of can be winnable campaigns and really good targets. CAPE is running a great campaign about reducing gas-fueled stoves and connecting it to reducing fracking in the north of BC. Stuff like that where you can help people connect something that's really relevant to them in their day-to-day life and a choice that they can make with a broader policy issue with equity consequences that then becomes more salient for decision makers. Those are really, really important targets. And so really, I think it can be helpful for us, instead of this really binary narrative we've had, save the planet or else, to start instead thinking, okay, how can we walk step by step, target by target towards well-being, building a good day for ourselves now and into the future? Some of the things that are evidence-based happiness are on the right-hand side there. It's as simple sometimes as choosing an action-oriented thought instead of a doom scroll inside your head. That's the sort of energy in your bucket to do this work. And so there's a lot of evidence around the health benefits of well-being. And I think that as we more and more start to move towards a society that is broadly oriented at every level towards well-being, the more we're going to be working from a place of power and love and hope in our hearts, and simply putting forward measures that are going to make life better now and into the future. So I am just starting an organization that's designed to really do that, harvesting some of these energies and ideas we have in our academic institutions that sometimes spend too much time in academic papers that nobody reads. So if anyone's interested, you can scan the QR code and get on our mailing list to help share our mischief. So anyway, incredibly happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Courtney. All of my communicator, my tail's wagging, I guess, is part of what I want to say. So David, Courtney laid out quite a few really interesting points. I'm curious from your perspective, what does October 1st mean, and why is this important? Why is this group important, and why is this moment important from your perspective?
Thank you. I wish the heck you'd put me before Courtney. How do you follow an act like that? I mean, she's nailed so many things. Anyway, thank you very much for that, Courtney. I think it was very, very powerful and uplifting. I really appreciate that. Let me begin by saying that I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Tlayaquat Nation, home of the Nuchanols people. They have cared for the lands and waters in this beautiful area of Vancouver Island for thousands of years. And I'm especially pleased right now because it was here in Tofino in 1989 that I received my first Indigenous name from one of the great elders of the Nuchanols people, Simon Lucas. And the name he gave me was Nuchi, which means mountain. I speak to you today as an elder, and I speak solely on behalf of my grandchildren who are free of, and I am free of any obligations to any organization, any company or political party. I'm free of the need for money, for fame, for power, or even sex. So this means that as an elder, I can speak the truth. These days, governments act as if elders are a problem. We become a drain on medical services, and we no longer contribute to the economy. So they got to get more and more younger people and immigrants to come here to keep that economy growing, because we're taking up so much of what that economy is serving. But I believe that rather than being marginalized the way we are and a nuisance, elders are the most important group in society today. Why? Because we've lived an entire life. Yeah, we're a pain for people like Courtney who are in the business of helping you to keep us alive, but we've already lived a complete life. We've had our ups and downs. We've had our struggles. We've had a few successes. We've witnessed changes in our surroundings. We've listened to the words and the actions of politicians and government officials. We've learned a hell of a lot. And now I believe our job is to sift through those life lessons. They've been hard won. And now we should sift through and say, what the hell have we learned? What can we tell the generations yet to come? What matters most in our lives? And I can tell you from the experience of caring for my father in the last month of his life, he never, ever talked about stuff, money, big house that he once owned in London, Ontario, the new car that he loved so much. The only thing my father talked about, and I believe those are the things that mattered, were family, friends, and the things that we did together. And to my father, that was his richness. He kept saying, David, I die a rich man. My wife and I had been supporting my parents financially ever since he retired. His wealth was those things that he did with people, family and friends. And in those, he did die a wealthy man. Elders, I believe, are a living record for society, a witness to the enormous changes that have happened in the world around. As a biologist, I look at people as biological beings. And, the amazing thing about us is we exhibit unbelievable diversity, not just biological diversity, though we exhibit the diversity of gender, of ethnicity, of language, of culture, of religion, of socioeconomic position. And they're all interesting things. We love to travel to experience the differences. But the differences now define us, define who we are and what we want. But we face enormous problems now as a result of those differences, from Gaza and Ukraine to the homeless and the poor. Our differences lock us into positions that ignore the most important reality. We all belong to one species. We're one species. And that fact determines our most fundamental needs, the needs of everybody in the world. We need to exist, to be healthy and to be well taken care of. We need clean air. We need pure water. We need rich food and soil. We need the energy that comes from the sun through photosynthesis. And the amazing thing to me as a biologist, these fundamental needs of all human beings are cleansed, regenerated, provided by the web of living things, the plants and animals. So earth, air, fire, and water, those are our most fundamental needs. And life itself provides those and renews those year after year. And not only is that, to me, an amazing thing, but most of the genes in humans are the same as the genes in every animal, every plant, every microorganism, because we share a common evolutionary history. And that means that all of life is our kin. And surely we treat relatives differently from if they were just resources. we treat them with love and respect. Surely then, we must all work together on to protect the most fundamental needs of all of our brother and sister human beings, as well as all of the other species that contribute to our well-being. The problem is that for most of human existence, we knew, and at this meeting I'm at here in Tofino, a new channel land guardian, he said it all. He said, we live in a web of relationships with all other animal and plant species, with air, water, soil, and sunlight. That is what we achieve by living in that web of relationships. And as one strand in a web, everything is interconnected. And therefore, as we receive the benefits of that web, we have a huge responsibility. And in most of what we do today, that reciprocity is missing. Now, this is not a criticism I make of you, Courtney, but it struck me when you said that the doctors had to be taught about how our health is related to the health of the planet. And I go, wait a minute now. What the hell? You mean a doctor who's concerned with our health doesn't understand that the air we breathe determines whether we live or not, and what we do to air then is going to determine how well we are. If you use the air as a garbage can, what the hell do you expect from humans? So, Courtney, I would strongly suggest that what you and people like Melissa Lamb of CAPE, who are so wonderful in getting the message out, is, for heaven's sakes, medicine, the practice of human health, must be shown. Everybody in medical school must know from the beginning that the state of the biosphere is a direct measure of the state of human being and human health. We, as long as you live in a web of relationships, you understand there is a reciprocity. We gain the benefits from that web, but we have a responsibility to, as Indigenous people tell me, act in a good way to ensure that the web remains intact so that it can continue to be as generous and abundant as it has in the past. The challenge I see that we face at this moment is that the systems that we've constructed to guide, to shape, and to constrain our behavior and our activity are built on a different understanding, rather than being founded on the idea of a web where we have responsibilities. We now believe that we exist in a pyramid. And in a pyramid, we're at the top and everything down below is for us. And we environmentalists run around then saying, oh, we've got to be more responsible. We've got to maintain the pyramid. But the pyramid of our laws, of our economy, of our politics, those things that we've developed to guide and constrain us are, in fact, the driving force of our destructiveness. So in trying, we've been arguing for years about the development of the tar sands. No, we mustn't develop the tar sands. No, we mustn't develop the infrastructure to deliver frack gas. But in all of our conversations, we keep the economists and the corporate leaders come to us and they negotiate then and say, oh, what about jobs? And what about the economy? What about taxes? And all that stuff. And we, what do we have? We have a very prominent potential president of the United States, who was already a past president, who's basically a climate denier. We had 10 years in Canada of a Stephen Harper government in which he said, no, we can't do anything about reducing emissions. That's crazy economics. So he elevated the economy above the atmosphere, the source of the air that we breathe, that creates weather, climate, and the seasons. No, the economy is more important. Not only is Donald Trump has a very good chance at being reelected, but we have a man who's going to come and be another Stephen Harper. Polyev is at that point now where it looks like he's got a very good chance of being our next prime minister. The past prime minister we thought was a salvation from the Stephen Harper years. He said Canada's back in 2015 when he went to Paris, and he invested in the tar sands. And look at what he did. He was the great savior, right? Who took climate seriously. And what did Trudeau do? He committed $5.5 billion. I mean, Ken, you can tell us what the numbers are here, but we started with $5.5 billion for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is now over $34 billion and still climbing, because he said we needed to increase the revenue by exporting more tar sands oil for the taxes to pay for the things that we have to do to reduce emissions. Now, what the hell is going on? This is nuts. But it makes sense, apparently, when you have the economy as being the driving force of what we do. Our laws are all rigged against nature because we're the ones that can define rights. We have recently patted ourselves on the back because Canada has recognized the rights of a river, the Magpie River in Quebec. Oh, isn't that? But who the hell do we think we are? That we're so authoritative, we're going to assign rights to everything. 99.99% of all species alive today have been here far longer than human beings. We are an infant species. We've been around for 200,000 years. And yet we think we can assign the rights. I think every species has the right to exist because it is here. It exists, from the whales to the rabbits to the mosquitoes. They have a right as much as we do to exist on this planet. Our economy is based on the creed of cancer, endless growth. Nothing
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry, I went on way too long.
I'm not quite sure. Part of my job is now to weave this together and wrap us up. We've got some questions coming in the Q&A, and just before we get to that, you both spoke passionately and laid out some complex ideas. David, one of the things that I wrote down here is, we've elevated the economy to be more important than the atmosphere. You highlighted the point that we're moving into an election. Courtney, you highlighted some of the points that we know resonate with seniors. We know from the work that we've done that they're very interested in health. And David, we know that from some of the work that we've done that the majority of seniors are very interested in the legacy that they're leaving behind and feel a sense of responsibility to their grandchildren and to their children. So knowing that, we've got 465 people on this call, and each one of those, or many of those, will be, again, organizing events and activities across the country in a couple of weeks. What would be one or two things that that we could be asking from your perspective? What are one or two things that seniors can do after October 1st to keep the momentum going? So I'll leave that. I'll go to you first, Courtney, and then to you, David, and then we'll move over to some Q&As.
I would love it to be very clear for anybody who's going to be a candidate in the next election that they simply can't get elected unless they are willing to have a healthy response to climate change. Because, yes, you may be part of, a party that doesn't believe in that, but at the end of the day, you have to get elected by the people who live in your neighborhood or in your community. And personal relationships matter a lot. That's why lobbyists exist. I often get asked, do I travel for the planet? And what I've learned is that I lose votes if I don't travel. And so if it's important, yes, I travel. I get on the plane and I go see whoever it is who's powerful and is in charge of making that decision. Because we all evolved to trust one another with the physiology we're walking around in right now. You know, we trust the people that we've seen, that we've been in proximity with, that we've danced with, that we've shared meals with. You want your potential politicians to think of you that way. There's a reason pharmaceutical reps go to doctors' offices, try to bring them lunch. They know the names of your kids. They actually keep notes on this. And so right now, when we tracked it, we worked with a scholar with the lobbying ratios. And what has usually been found is that most federal politicians see about 5 fossil fuel lobbyists for every 1 NGO lobbyist. So when we think about just how much we trust the people we see, I think that's a big reason why we get the outcomes we have. And the way funding for NGOs goes, you know, part of what I'm hoping to do with Power is have evidence-based lobbyists, but it's going to take us time to get to that in terms of money. And so you can do that. And I think there's no reason to be nasty about it. What I would tend to do is bake like your best cookie recipe and like take it down to the constituency office or the electoral office and like have a nice conversation with someone, get to know their staffers, be like, hey, climate's really important. Bring your baby grandkid, bring your puppy. Apparently, this is also really helpful. Humanize yourself. I think many of us struggle with climate anxiety at different parts of our journey. And that often shows up as us acting out of anxiety. And I think there's a difference between the fact that action alleviates anxiety and acting out of anxiety. Because when you're that anxious person, you give off a certain energy. And I've been that person so many times. People will like, when I used to start to show up at medical meetings, because David, I have given this whole thing a good go. And to reassure you that the deans of the medical schools are going to vote on a plan that I wrote on October 28th that will hopefully like centralize this in medical schools, but it has taken 15 years. And part of the reason was I used to show up and they didn't want to talk to me. They would like duck. I would see people ducking into the bathroom when they saw me coming. So you don't want to be that person. Got to think like a lobbyist. Show up looking nice, bring them food, be pleasant to talk to, but yet very persistent about what you want. And if we can do that around the country for every single political party, be like, look, you are not going to get elected unless you have a responsible response to the climate. They will start to feed that up through their party. And I think that is something that really seniors would be extremely well placed to do because we know they already fear you.
Thank you, Courtney. And the communicator in me has to reiterate this point that, the people have a distorted sense of the priority that this is for Canadians. The majority of Canadians are concerned, but because they don't hear from the majority of Canadians, and they tend to box in, oh, that's an environmentalist, that's an environmental concern. It's really helpful to have people who are not attached to an organization, who are representing just, humanity, speak to this issue and to talk to them. David, from your perspective, same question. What would be 1 or 2 things that you would encourage seniors to think about after the moment of October 1st that we could be doing in our communities?
The most common question I'm asked, of course, is what can I do? Because there's a sense of helplessness and, people will say, well, it's too late. There's nothing I can do. And when you give up, then this is exactly what the fossil fuel industry wants. They want us to feel there's nothing we can do because they're selling the line that we're always going to need fossil fuels. I think, we should name what that is. It's evil. They have known since 1959. We know that the industry has known that burning their product over time by the year 2000, if it continued to climb the way it has, that we would be in deep trouble. But in the name of profit, of course, they've continued to spend billions of dollars while taking billions in our subsidies. They've spent tens of billions of dollars to say, no, it's not real. And it's worked. One of the ways it's worked is that they denigrate scientists themselves by undermining the credibility of scientists. And now with social media, they can say through all kinds of avenues, misinformation, disinformation. And if scientists are not held up, we've just heard about the planetary boundaries. This is Johan Rockström's work that is just so critical, that there are 9 boundaries, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the pH of the oceans. These are boundaries. If we exceed those boundaries, the prospect for us, for life, becomes pretty grim. Now, let me back up and say, the planet's not in trouble. We're not saving the Earth. We're not that powerful. The planet will go on doing what it's always done. It changes its properties, and we're so big now, we can actually change some of the physical, chemical, and biological properties. But the planet's fine. The planet will go chugging along. What is not fine is the biosphere for us, and we continue to degrade it. Anyway, the warnings have been there for decades and decades from the leading scientists, and now we're at a point where it's no longer incremental change is not going to do it. A new law here, a new park there, a tax incentive or a tax disincentive, which is what politicians will try to do. It's not going to work. The crisis is too great. And putting your money into SMRs, small nuclear reactors, geoengineering and all of that, that's just pushing it off. To say, oh, we're so smart, we're going to come up with solutions. Then is it too late? Well, it's pretty late. But the fact is that you have to keep doing the best you can. And to individuals, I say there are 2 things I think should be a priority. One is we are each a drop in the bucket. But if you have enough drops, you can fill pretty well any bucket you want. So we as individuals, we want to be part of a movement where, one, we're reducing our impact. Now, fossil fuels have become a part of everything that we use, whether it's the food, whether it's our clothing, whether it's our vehicles, whatever, the television sets, computers, everything needs energy. And most of it comes from fossil fuels to make it and run it. So reduce our consumption. We are 70% of the economy now is consumption. How much of that is stuff that we need? There's a great group in England called LEAP that says if you want to have an impact on, as one person, this is what you do. And they list under clothing, and I couldn't believe it. They say buy 3 new articles of clothing a year. That's a challenge. I've got enough clothes in my closet to last me until I kick on. Now I'm going to die a lot sooner than most of you, but that's one of them. And but the big one is travel. And they say, if you want to go on a short haul flight between Calgary and Vancouver, or Toronto and Ottawa, or Montreal, 1 flight every 3 years. If you want to go on a long haul flight from Vancouver to Toronto, or from Toronto to Paris, once every 7 years. So flying, for someone like me, who's a carbon sinner big time as a documentary filmmaker, I've got such a carbon footprint from the past. This is a real challenge. I have to admit that I've said I'm not going to fly jets anymore for the nature of things, but I've resigned. That was 5 years ago. Zoom has been a huge contribution to this, but I have flown twice now in the last 5 years by jet. But compared to my previous record, that's quite a bit.
Thank you, David.
Well, I say cut down on your consumption. That's where you can all have a big effect. And that means try to cut your own energy use by 50% in a year. And then, as Courtney said, get involved politically. And that's not just signing letters or anything. I mean, writing letters, calling, going on action events. We've got to be actively involved. That's why I'm looking forward to October 1st. And it's been exhilarating to see what Nick and Raleigh have been involved with SCAN, this that is spread across the country.
Thank you very much. I would reiterate the that talking to people also about the fact that you're reducing your consumption and that you're talking and getting politically involved inspires other people and helps to normalize it and make people feel like, oh yeah, maybe I should be doing that too. So having just simple conversations with people is really helpful. Karen, I'm going to invite you on. I'm not sure we are running over, but if we have a couple minutes for a couple questions, this would be the time.
Okay, well, we've got a lot of questions, so I'll try to pick a few that have received lots of support. The first one was from Heather Stevens, and it's a communications question. She asked, do we agree that it is helpful to speak of climate breakdown rather than climate change, as delineated by Adam Welts in The End of Eden? Amber, maybe as a communications expert, you could comment on that.
It's climate
Yeah.
chaos, I think.
Yeah, really interesting. I would say that it depends on who you're talking to. I think that the majority of Canadians do not understand climate chaos, climate emergency, climate breakdown, in the same way that the people potentially on this call do. And that sense of kind of urgency or emergency doesn't actually help people engage more. And really, I think the point that we need to be underscoring is the connection between burning fossil fuels causes climate change. So for the majority of Canadians, they see extreme weather, they're experiencing extreme weather, they understand that that's connected to climate change. The real missing link for many people is that burning fossil fuels is what's driving climate change. So I think if I were to spend my time and my money, it would be on that point, because that's really the thing that sets up everything else. That's why we're talking to you about energy efficiency, about reducing consumption, about renewables, et cetera, ways of burning less fossil fuels, because that is what's driving climate change. So I think we've kind of got people to the point where they understand what climate change is. When we start talking about breakdown and chaos and emergency, it tends to put people or the messenger in a activist kind of advocacy space. And really, I would say that the people who are on this call, part of your big potential is that you don't have to be, you have the potential of kind of breaking out of that. And we need a much broader segment of Canadians to feel engaged and to better understand some of the points that I've raised. So other people might say something else, but I would say call it climate change, but really spend your time on underscoring the point that burning fossil fuels causes climate change.
Great, thank you very much. Well, Richard Swift, and David, you touched on this, asked, don't we need to embrace degrowth if we're going to survive as a species?
Absolutely. The economy has just become far too big to be in any way sustainable. I'm going to be talking with Mark Carney next month in Toronto about this. That it's the economic system that is built on this crazy idea that growth is essential for the health of the economy. You can't keep doing that. It's way too big already, and it's too unequally distributed. You know, why is it that any human being can be worth $1 billion, for God's sakes? You know, this should be outlawed. And now they say Musk is headed to be the first trillionaire. I don't think we have any concept of what $1 billion is, let alone $1 trillion. And yet we let the economy not only drive political priorities, but we let the people who are ultra rich to dictate so many. You know, I'm at a meeting here in Tofino, and this is a gathering of a group I'd never heard of before. These are philanthropists who've given away over $4 billion, and you know, that's a massive amount of money. But they're trying to urge their fellow billionaires to contribute more. The reason I'm here is they're beginning to say, oh, do you think maybe we should support Indigenous people? Anyway, my question is, why is any person or group allowed to be that wealthy, and the drive for more doesn't make sense to me. That anyway.
Thank you. Catherine Jane Hazel asks, how do we get the same access to government as fossil fuel lobbyists? We get half an hour after trying for months to get an appointment. The oil and gas reps seem to get unfettered access. Does anybody want to take that on?
I'm curious to hear, Courtney, your experience. Yeah.
So after running for the Green Party, realized I wanted to learn a lot more about well-being economics. So I went and did a master's in public policy at the Blavatnik School of Government at Oxford. And I was very lucky to work with Kate Rayworth and Eric Feinhocker and all sorts of people. And so the answer they would give, I think, is the structural power of business. So the fact that politicians partly get judged on whether or not they create jobs, and they see industry as a way of helping them to create jobs. And also we have, so that's one thing. So they see them as a route to jobs, whereas I think most of us are a route to votes. And so there's power in both of those positions, but it's a different kind of power. And so I think recognizing that is important, but also, you know, when I look at what happened after we passed the anti-greenwashing bill, and all of the companies had to scrub their websites, I realized that I think doctors included, a lot of powerful people in Canada have been probably mostly unconsciously working with a mental model that has been provided by the fossil fuel industry. And I'm including a lot of very powerful doctors. When I did a landscape analysis of the Canadian medical school system last year for Health Canada and the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada, the number one barrier was that the most powerful doctors didn't know what they didn't know. And when I sort of said to a bunch of them, have you ever read a journal article from the Lancet Planetary Health or the Journal of Climate Change and Health? They didn't even know those were journals. And so I think that if we understand that the fossil fuel generated misinformation is totally pervasive, you look at the editorial board commentaries of the Globe and Mail and other major newspapers, people are not working with an evidence-based perspective. And I think we essentially have to overwhelm them with numbers and persistence. And I know that's really hard. And what I would say is that there is a lot of courage in community and strength in community, and that the more you can make it fun for yourselves, the better. I literally used to bake cookies for every single presentation that I ever gave, so that when people got sad when I was talking about wildfires or, you know, heat emergencies, and they all looked like they kind of wanted to jump off a cliff, I was like, double fudge. So keeping the energy up, keeping the energy in your own buckets as a community helps you attract other humans, because humans like good energy. So then you have more people, and then you can start to be like, okay, we're just going to keep going and talking to Peter, you know, hey, Peter, I'm, you know, and you show up enough times, you start to build a relationship. They start to know you. They know that their interaction with you isn't going to be definitely painful for them. If it's always painful, they're just going to turn around. And so building those relationships, you start to have influence over them. And when I think about what seniors bring to the table, you bring so much in the way of smart and savvy in those types of interactions, because you've done this before. And many seniors are looking for a way to spend time that has purpose. And so I think that if you get a group together and just keep being there pleasantly, persistently, I actually think that that is an incredible way to start to overwhelm that structural power of industry, because really at the end of the day, the politicians need the votes.
I have one more for Courtney. James Cleland asked and says, Courtney, I liked the way you connect healthcare to the web of life. How could we do this for other activities like agriculture, forestry, finance, etc.?
I think what I love is when you think about the planetary health nest and you realize that most studies show that probably only somewhere between 5 and 25% of overall health outcome is related to healthcare. That means that when we make other interventions, we all have the ability to become planetary healers. I know that when when I'm staying up at 3 o'clock in the morning to look at a patient's blood work, I'm not doing that because like almost nothing that I do is because I get paid to do it. It's great that I get paid. That's awesome. But I do most of my work for free in planetary health. It's because I care. And I care about the fact that I want people to be well. And when you look at surveys, you look at the thought of thinkers back to Aristotle, you look at Bentham, this has been something that people have wanted forever. And so I really think that if we set well-being as the ultimate goal of our society, that is the thing that we all want at the bedside at 3 a.m. when people are scared. They want to be well. That is what every single person I have ever met in any clinical interaction across Canada, across socioeconomic strata, across the world wants. They want to be well, and they want the people they love to be well now into the future. So if we connect that desire and value we all have on the personal level with our policy, with our actions at the personal level, what we do as a family, the policy measures we put forward as a community, all the way up subnational, national level, and it's all aligned, and we know that that's our goal. So living well, a good life for all within planetary boundaries now and into the future, I think we'll be pulling from this place of purpose that has, in a GDP and income-based economy, really been untapped. And I think that it will help us act with love. And man, that is a almost untappable resource or unexhaustible resource. And so thinking about where we're acting from, how we're aligning what we do personally with what we're aiming for nationally, I think that those are all ways that we can start to feel that our actions are healing not only ourselves and our planet. And it's amazing what kind of energy that gives you.
Next, we have a couple of examples of actions that to help kind of inspire us and give us a sense of the art of the possible. We have two examples, one from a larger city center. So Erlene, that is you in Vancouver. And then following Erlene will be Marjorie, who is going to talk a little bit about the event that they are organizing in Pugwash. So without further ado, over to you, Erlene.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Erlene from the BC Hub and Suzuki Elders, and we are inviting people to come to an afternoon on October the 1st called Climate Crawl Through the Arts, Culture and Action. So we're inviting people to join us at Performance Works on Granville Island to explore how the arts, that's film, music, and dance, are contributing to climate action and impact across generations. And what we're trying to do is to do what Courtney and David have both talked about, and that's to do what we are calling extending the choir, to try to reach out to people that are not already activists, that are interested in maybe having a conversation, but don't want to feel threatened or guilty or any of those things, but maybe just are willing to come and to have an afternoon enjoying the arts. And so we want to have fun, but we also want to deal with tough topics through these films that we're showing. And they are locally made environmental films that we've found and are offering, and putting that between line dancing and singing. So that's basically what we're doing.
Thank you, Arlene. Marjorie, over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to take a minute to situate people in Pugwash. It's the opposite coast from Vancouver, but it's a village of 800. So it offers different challenges, I think, to planning a day of action. I was thinking though, both Pugwash and Vancouver are located in estuaries or deltas that were rich in marine life and inhabited by Indigenous peoples long before white settlers came here. And Pugwash, as this slide indicates, takes its name from Pegweek, or shallow water. I suspect that most people, if they've heard of Pugwash, have heard about it in relation to the Pugwash Peace Conferences, which began in 1957 when Cyrus Eaton responded to a plea from Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein in the Russell-Einstein Manifesto for global work on nuclear disarmament. And we really have to have that kind of call for global work now on climate breakdown. Eaton offered to host nuclear scientists from both sides of the Iron Curtain, provided they met at Thinkers Lodge in his native town. And so there have been lots of conferences at Thinkers Lodge since then on peace, disarmament, and other topics. But there's no chapter, so far as I'm aware, of any of the 6 climate actions groups collaborating in the Seniors for Climate Initiative in Pugwash. So what we've done is built upon the networks already in Pugwash, established by environmental organizations like the one you just saw on the previous slide, Friends of the Pugwash Estuary, which has done some wonderful work. So we can go back to now the slide, the next slide, which indicates the basic structure of the events we're planning. So we're beginning with a series of panel presentations. And I was thinking just organizing these panel presentations has led me to realize, to use Courtney's terms, how there are planetary healers operating all around us, even in small communities like Pugwash, that I wasn't aware of before. So some of the speakers will be speaking about eelgrass in remediation in Nova Scotia. There are farmers and woodlot operators who are involved in projects in promoting biodiversity and carbon cycling. Are concluding, and we've also included someone who's representing the larger municipality around Pugwash and talking about some of the initiatives underway, which I was cheered to hear about. There are initiatives underway and dealing with energy and emissions and renewables. And our concluding presentation kind of widens the scope by taking us to the circumpolar north through the eyes, viewed through the eyes of a local writer who's traveled around the pole talking to Indigenous peoples. And so then I was actually really struck by the plans for Vancouver, because in Pugwash, we really wanted to draw on the power of the arts in this event, and to make it fun and enjoyable. So we're going from the presentation into a more informal gathering and rally with music and poetry and performance. And we've got a small art display being organized featuring local artists, and a book display being organized by librarians, and the events taking place in a very nice new public library in Pugwash. So that's what we're working on. The second part is still a very fluid work in progress. We want to add other elements. We'll see what we can do.
Thank you, Marjorie. Nova Scotia holds a special place in my heart. That's where my family is, and multiple generations before me. There are, as I understand, 62 actions that are being planned at the moment. So for folks who have not yet connected, you can go to the website, and I think that Nick will be talking a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes, but they are all on a map on the website. And if you click on the closest community to you, you'll have more information and details about the event and the plans for October 1st. So the next presenter is Ken Johnson. He is a climate activist with SCAN Ottawa. And he was the co-founder of below2c.org and co-host of Time for Action, a series of 25 weekly webinars deep in the COVID epidemic on crucial aspects of climate action with a number of great Canadian climate authors and activists. So Ken, over to you.
Thanks, Amber. First of all, Arlene and Marjorie, those sound like great events. I think I'd like to come to both of them. Good evening. David, thanks for mentioning your dad. I can attest to David Suzuki's father's richness. I used to run into him on the beach in Kitsilano with his Volkswagen bus and small fishing boat decades ago. However, Unlike your dad, David, today I'm going to be speaking all about stuff. We all know how easy it is to be pessimistic these days about climate change. I'm sure all of you are partly here because you worry about it. And who doesn't have the weekly experience of seeing on the news another climate-driven weather disaster? Floods in Europe, wildfires in northern Canada, heat domes across North America. Heat domes, and then we in Canada watch as we play out as a petrostate, continuing huge annual subsidies to all kinds of oil and gas industry nonsense. Well, I've run into 3 visionaries in particular that demonstrate some light at the end of the tunnel. Some of you will know about them, but I suspect most of you won't. And to bring some optimism to tonight's thing, I'd like to talk about their work. Their names are Amory Lovins, Tony Seba, and Mark Jacobson. They are all brilliant in their own work, and they and their research groups are a source of inspiration. I'd like to share a few of their ideas and slides today. In the way of overview, these 3 guys are all over the adoption of solar, wind, batteries, and electric vehicles and efficiency. I'll focus on the exponential growth and plummeting costs of these climate solutions. I'll finish briefly discussing the situation of Canada as an outlier. Tony Seba is as a part-time prof at Stanford University, Silicon Valley entrepreneur and thought leader on the transition to clean tech for the last 15 years. He's written several books, and in 2021, he said, "We are on the cusp of the fastest, deepest, most consequential transformation of energy in 100 years." My second hero here is physicist Amory Lovins, who wrote Soft Energy Paths in the 1970s, the first book about energy sustainability. He has been an energy advisor to major firms and governments in 70 countries for 45 years. Author of 31 books and 650 papers. Let's just say he's a pretty smart guy. RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute, is the brainchild of Amory Lovins. In its June 2024 report that just came out, they talked about the clean tech revolution, saying it's exponential, disruptive, and happening right now. So, and here's what they're talking about. First, a note about the slides. I'm a scientist, so I could talk about graphs all day, happily. But my wife said, "Don't you dare." So the important thing here is just to take away an impression of what's going on, not the specific details of the graphs. The 3 graphs look at clean tech sales of solar, the share electric vehicles, and batteries. The takeaway message is that for each one, sales started to really take off around 2020. And since then, you can see the arrows pointing almost straight up, i.e. very rapid, steep, extremely rapid, exponential, in fact, increases. Here's the increasing rate of deployment of wind energy. Again, all these graphs are run from the bottom scale is always the last couple decades, maybe up to 2030, and the vertical axis is always the amount that we're talking about here. So here's the increasing deployment of wind energy, and here are the projections for solar sales through 2030. Now, note, this is not cumulative, but each bar is how many sales that year. So they're going up extremely quickly. In the past decade, global solar generation has grown 12-fold, i.e. 12,000% or 12 times. Solar capacity is now doubling global solar capacity is now doubling every 2 or 3 years. Solar is now being installed faster than any technology in history. And in 2023, here's the additions to the global electricity grid, dominated by solar. Over 50% is solar, and solar, wind, and hydro represent 83% of the new capacity in last year. In the past decade, battery storage sales have grown 180 times and are now doubling every year. Remember, these bars are additions each year, not the total to date. And the electric vehicle share of new car sales worldwide was less than 1% a decade ago. By 2020, it was about 5%, And this year it's 18%. But by the end of next year, it may be close to 40%. Now, these are, I think, are really important. Courtney said you need to give them, overwhelm them with numbers and evidence. Well, this is numbers and evidence of what can happen and what is happening elsewhere. And here's an example of all this build out, an electric build out in China in particular. The Chinese BYD Seagull, a 300+ kilometer range electric car, selling for $11,400 US price tag. My wife said, OMG, at this point, when I tried the slides on her, when are we getting our own one of those? Well, of course, this is why the 100% tariffs on Chinese built cars are being implemented in North America and were just announced in Canada recently. So why is the adoption of these clean technology currently so strong? The plummeting cost of renewables is the key. I don't have time to get into the market adoption S-curves or cost curves. Suffice it to say that they explain and predict the pattern of adoption of new technologies, including exponential growth, and are driven purely by economics. And whether it was the adoption of the automobile 100 years ago, washing machines, color TVs, VCRs, your cell phones, or the internet, they all follow these S-curves. So here are the remarkable drops in renewable costs. Wind costs dropped 46% in the 2010s and are expected to drop another 43% this decade. Battery costs have dropped 87% in the 2010s, expected to drop another 80% this decade. And in 2024, we're already halfway to that, dropping in half of battery costs. Solar has dropped 82% over the 2010s and is expected to drop another 72% this decade. Now, just try and wrap your head around that and compare that with mega projects, which always go just the opposite way. The Trans Mountain Pipeline going from 7 billion to 34 billion and counting. Nuclear always over cost. And here's what the cost declines look like. This is for solar. US utility solar dropped from 27 cents a kilowatt hour in 2010 to 4.6 cents a kilowatt hour in 2020. And it's probably on its way to costing 2 cents a kilowatt hour by 2030. Solar is now the cheapest source of energy ever. And you can see on this graph how the cost of solar, the yellow line, and wind, the blue line, have just plummeted and are now below oil, gas peaker plants, and nuclear by quite a bit. So Tony Sieben notes that there's a convergence of solar, wind, and batteries, and the cost of already the cheapest source of grid energy will become 70% cheaper by the end of this decade. So the new technologies are beneficial to changing our current fossil fuel footprint internationally. You can see that as the renewables are starting to take off, that will start to drive down the fossil fuels used for creating electricity and used in cars. I'm going to read this highlighted quote from a recent article in The Economist to help you wrap your head around the amount of growth, because we think linearly, not exponentially. And we think and act in our life in the world tends to be linear, but these things are going exponential. To call solar power's rise exponential is not hyperbole, but a statement of fact. Installed solar capacity doubles roughly every 3 years and so grows tenfold every decade. Such sustained growth is seldom seen in anything that matters. That makes it hard for people to get their heads around. When it was a tenth of its current size 10 years ago, solar power was still seen as marginal, even by experts who knew how fast it had grown. The next tenfold increase will be equivalent to multiplying the world's entire fleet of nuclear reactors, that's over 400 of active ones, 8 by 8 in less time than it typically takes to build one nuclear reactor. And another way to look at it is how much capital, how much money is being poured into clean tech. Well, the first clean tech trillion took decades of investment. The second trillion will happen in 4 years, and it started here in 2021. That should be a great cause for optimism, because not only are they investing more, but everything's going down in price, so you're getting a lot more bang for your buck. As a result of these developments, the COP goal of tripling renewables by 2022 from 2022 levels by 2030 is actually within reach. And it's happening in many places. More than half the growth in clean tech is in China. In a decade, solar has increased 35 times, wind 9 times, batteries and EVs scaled up even faster. But it's not just China. And here's this incredible, one of the many solar projects, enormous solar projects, 1.7 billion project called the Junma Solar Power Station. And Junma means horse. It's located in the Kabuki Desert in Inner Mongolia. Exponential growth is also happening in clean tech in the OECD countries that are all mapped out here. So it's not just China. Furthermore, there's exponential growth in clean tech in emerging economies. Of course, we don't hear about this much. Brazilian wind is taking off. Vietnam solar has made huge strides. India solar has made huge strides. And Morocco is building out a huge infrastructure for wind. Here's my third visionary, Mark Jacobson, and I'll end shortly after this. Mark Jacobson is a prof at Stanford and the director of the Atmosphere Energy Program there. His group models how 100% renewable energy would work in countries around the world. Here's their summary of what mix of different clean tech would be optimal for the entire planet, noting how much rooftop solar plants, onshore wind, offshore wind, etc. They estimate that it will create 52 million jobs, and the loss of fossil fuel jobs would only be 27 million. Also save 5 to 7 million air pollution deaths a year, as Courtney was talking about earlier. And here's a similar vision for a transition to 100% wind, water, and solar energy in Canada. I just want to show a couple more slides. This one is this is a very exciting time. California has built out their renewables over the last 20 years with great determination, and now they're really building out the batteries as well. And on May 25th, the California main grid electricity demand was covered entirely all day by wind, water, and solar. Noted here, this is 24 hours of time, and this is the demand, is this red curve. This is solar, wind, and hydro up here. So what we see is there was a 50% excess production in the early afternoon. They used that to fill batteries, and then in the evening they used the purple here was battery power, helping to support the energy demand. Meanwhile, back in Canada, situation very different. Canada remains an outlier among the G7 nations in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Other G7 countries, including the US, Britain, and Japan, have been consistently dropping their carbon footprints since about 2005, this region here, to 20 to 50% below their peak greenhouse gas levels. Canada has failed to cut emissions meaningfully. We're still here well above our 1990 levels and as a total outlier. The other thing that we have to worry about, of course, as has been mentioned, is Poilievre is in the wings with far more interest in axing the tax than dealing with the climate crisis. So I'd just like to finally mention one other type of climate solution. There's a new NGO trying to minimize the chance of a conservative majority in the next federal election. It's called Cooperate for Canada, and I would consider checking it out. They're focused on key ridings where a cooperative approach could prevent a conservative win. In conclusion, this is the decade of energy and transportation disruption, exponential growth of renewables driven by technological innovation and huge cost reductions, cautious optimism that the world could meet its tripling renewables target for 2030, And finally, that Canada is out of step with developments around the world. And my final conclusion, for the sake of my grandson, I hope the clean tech revolution plays out as predicted, and that seniors in Canada can play a role in making that happen here. Thank you.
So we have one last quick presentation, and then we're going to wrap up. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Nick, to talk a bit more about getting involved.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the after chat where we can go into a lot more answering some of the questions. Some of you will maybe be looking now for where you can find activities in your local area. And so if you go to our webpage, you'll see this map. And what you have to do is click on one of these stars, and it gives you the details of what's happening in that area. So if you want to know what's going on in your area, check that out. But you may also want to know, you maybe want to get involved and maybe set up something where in an area where nothing is happening as of yet, and it's not too late. So if you go to our webpage, and I'm hoping that we can get to that slide. Okay, so you go to the webpage, and what have we got there? Well, we've got several things you can use. One is you can click at the top there on the map and get the sense of what's happening across the country and whether there's something happening in your area. There is a resources page which gives you everything you need to initiate an event in your locality. We have things like a recorded presentation by David Suzuki, and thanks, David, for that. We have organizers who will help you and work with you to help you set things up. And if you click on that Join Us button, you can contact us. And as minimally, if you want, join our mailing list and be kept up to date on what's happening and how we're going. And of course, we also would like you to contribute money. And why do we need money? Well, because we're hiring media specialists, we're developing promotional material, we're developing materials that are being sent out to the different sites. We have a website, social media, and all of this is, in addition to a large cohort of volunteers, but we can't do this without some funding. So you'll see the small change fund, and there'll be an opportunity for you to donate. But I want to get to the general idea that, I think David Suzuki referenced this. A small drop can't do much, but you can fill a bucket if you put all the drops together. So what are we about? We're actually talking about building a stronger and a more powerful movement. If we don't do that, we can't succeed. If we do that, there is hope. So what have we done in the last period of time? We've together formed coalitions in large and small communities across the land. Senior activists have made contact with youth, environmental groups, are beginning to make contact with Indigenous people in various ways across the country. From Salt Spring Island to St. John, Newfoundland, seniors are declaring that we want climate action. And action means building a bigger and larger movement. It's being more than individuals, it's joining together, and it's building the kind of power that can't be ignored. So time's running out. And what we're talking about here is a start. October 1st is a start. It's not the end. So we're going to mobilize beyond October 1st. We'll have certainly another day next year. It'll be bigger and better with more connections and more alliances than this year on October 1st. But we'll also be doing more than that. We'll be organizing other activities. So we'll follow up the October 1st with a debriefing session with the 63 communities across the country that have organized events, and we'll decide further actions and get back to you. So the importance is to get on our mailing list and be kept informed of that. And just to finish, it's all about building. It's all about building and joining together across the country and to make the kind of movement that can't be ignored. And in fact, to join up with people around the world, because we need that. We need people active everywhere if we're going to solve these problems.
Thank you, Nick. Well, thank you, everybody. That is a close to tonight's webinar. Thank you to the presenters, Yvonne, Rolly, David, Courtney, Erlene, Marjorie, Ken, and Nick. And thank you, Karen, for keeping us on track with the questions. Thanks to everybody behind the scenes. Thank you to the sponsors and funders and endorsers. Thank you to everybody who showed up and who are organizing events across the country, more than 63. And finally, I am so excited about joining the events here in Calgary, and I look forward to seeing all of you in person on October 1st. Good night. Thank you, everybody.